I call the meeting to order. Assistant Secretary Throw, please call the roll.
Trustee Barry. Trustee Boone. Here. Chair Brockman.
Here.
Trustee Case.
Here.
Trustee Dow.
Here.
Trustee Fitton.
Here.
Trustee O'Hagan.
Here.
Trustee Gosney.
Here.
Trustee Gray.
Here.
Trustee Greer.
Here.
Trustee Lucas.
Here.
Trustee McCoy. Trustee Myers.
Here.
Trustee Trump.
Here.
Trustee Pope.
Here.
Trustee Shue.
Here.
Trustee Stacy.
Here.
Trustee Swanson.
Here.
Trustee Vance.
Here.
Trustee Williams.
Here.
Trustee Wilson.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have the floor.
Thank you. The one item on the agenda is the termination of tenured faculty proceedings involving Dr. Scott Stanley. Dr. Stanley has waived the hearing. The president has submitted a statement of charges. Dr. Stanley has responded, and the university has filed a reply. As a result, the board must decide the matter based on the filings we have today. However, board members may have questions. Anticipating that potential, both Dr. Stanley's attorney, Ms. Keith, and the University of Kentucky Assistant General Counsel, Sept, are present to answer any questions. With the prerogative of being chair, I would like to ask the first questions of Ms. Keith, and then Ms. Sept can respond if she wishes. After reading both briefs, I am confused as to the actual vote before the Faculty Hearing Committee. My questions first to Ms. Keith are, number one, what was the vote that Dr. Stanley actually committed a violation? And number two, what was the vote that Dr. Stanley should be removed? Ms. Keith.
Mr. Chair, my understanding from the email in which we were provided the results, 6 members of the Faculty Hearing Committee determined that there was sufficient evidence to support Dr. Stanley's removal. 2 individuals abstained. 1 individual said there was sufficient evidence, but disciplinary action less than revocation was appropriate. And then there were 2 that found that there was not sufficient evidence.
Ms. Sept, do you have anything else to add?
No, that's correct.
Thank you. I'd like to now open the floor up for questions. Are there any questions? Yes. Trustee Vance.
Dr. Stanley's various responses, Dr. Stanley never explicitly denies that he communicated false results as it pertains to the subject matter sample B1-022843. Ms. Keith, is it Dr. Stanley's position that despite this sample having never been opened, that he stands by that it was tested twice before he communicated the negative results?
I think the thrust of all of our documents reflects the fact that without additional information, Dr. Stanley cannot speak to the specific allegation. There are a number of inaccuracies that allow us to question the overall integrity of that specific finding. Number one, that was a B sample, and we've never seen a photograph of the alleged unopened sample. But in addition to that, all samples are received in more than one vial. So assuming that there was discovery of one unopened vial in the EACO lab refrigerator, that is not conclusive evidence that no testing had been performed.
Ms. Sept.
Yes. I disagree that 4 vials would have been delivered to Lab B. Ms. Keith is correct, it was a B sample, meaning that Lab A might have got 4 vials, which is very custom, okay? But Lab B is not gonna get 4 vials because Lab A is not gonna give you the entire sample. They sent 1 tube, which would be the B sample. It is not custom to send 4 of the same sample to Lab B. The purpose of Lab B is to confirm the initial screening from Lab A. So there would be no need for them to send 4 to Lab B.
My understanding that in addition to the B sample that is provided, any additional untested sample is transmitted along with the set-aside Lab B sample. So it is possible that in addition to the 1 vial that is designated Lab B, there is additional material that can be tested.
If anything is possible, that is highly unlikely, and again, haven't been able to put witnesses on. Witnesses from Highland who were prepared to explain to you all there was 1 vial sent to Lab B.
Highwoo isn't the one who sends the sample to Lab B. Essentially, all of the samples arrive at the EACL, all of the vials, all 4 of them customarily, and then it is the individuals who intake and input the samples into the LIMS system that then establish what will be sample B. So Highwoo's testimony as to what they sent to the lab is immaterial because they didn't send the sample to the lab.
I'll say this and let it rest. Highwoo's investigation will show that there was 1 tube sent to the lab, as would UKIA's report. Okay, both would show that. The LIMS database will show also how many were received. There were not 4 tubes received at Lab B. EACL did not receive 4 tubes of that vial, and she cannot prove otherwise.
I haven't been provided any of this evidence.
The floor is open for further questions. Trustee Boone.
Ms. Keith, regarding the blind sample that was sent by the Racehorse Medication Testing Consortium, the university says that Dr. Stanley directed that the sample be reported as negative, despite the presence of triamcinolone. What is the excuse or rationale for missing that or reporting it falsely, given that this was the quality control sample sent to all accredited labs and every other lab reported it correctly? How does Dr. Stanley explain this discrepancy?
Trustee Boone, I will just in all candor say I'm not here as a proxy to testify on behalf of Dr. Stanley. That's not really my role here today. I can't speak to some sort of explanation for the result for that particular sample. It's our understanding that in the absence of actually having the documentation that confirms that it was in fact reported inaccurately, we can't really speak to that. Which is in essence, in all of our pleadings before this board, we have said in the absence of the underlying data that supports the conclusions that you all have received in connection with the UKIA or the Highway report, we cannot drill down to offer a legitimate defense to any of these accusations because we don't have the data.
Ms. Stephanie, does the university have a response?
Our only response is that the data that Ms. Keith is referencing does not belong to the university, it belongs to Highwoo and or HISA. There are federal laws that prevent the disclosure of certain data, and we cannot change that as a university. That was not on us to produce that information.
We have received some documentation in connection with a subpoena served to HISA, and that does not include information that relates explicitly to the samples at issue in their report. We sought that data directly from HIWU and ISA in connection with these proceedings, along with seeking whatever data and information the university had to support its audit. As you can see from the materials that were submitted, there's been no shortage of requests for that data. It's not in any part due to a lack of persistence on the part of Dr. Stanley to attempt to get the information that he needs in order to be able to fully respond to these questions.
The floor is open for further questions. Trustee Case.
Ms. Keith, as I understand it, the Horse Race Medication Testing Consortium, which is independent of the Horse Racing Integrity Welfare Unit, or HIWU, and not involved in HIWU's investigation, suspended the university's Equine Analytical Chemical Laboratories accreditation for non-compliance. Does Dr. Stanley believe that the Horse Race Medication Testing Consortium is also conspiring against him? And if so, how has that taken place?
The removal of the accreditation by the HRTC was done after Dr. Stanley's removal from the EACL, and it is my understanding, again, from Dr. Stanley, that had to do with the fact that his replacement did not possess the credentialing required to maintain that, and that it wasn't in connection with some separate and independent analysis of the EACL and or Dr. Stanley's conduct.
Ms. Gay.
Any response would most likely be speculation, to be honest. It's my understanding that the RNTC, he lost that accreditation because of the lack of compliance, the lack of control within the lab. That is my understanding.
The floor is open.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Lucas.
Ms. Keith, Dr. Stanley has claimed that one untested sample allegation is the only confirmed issue against him. But the HIWU notes that 146 samples that failed initial screening were not put through the confirmatory analysis. Given why these samples are being tested in the first place, does Dr. Stanley not think that this is a significant issue, and if not, why?
Again, unfortunately, Dr. Stanley doesn't have any specific information related to the samples that were allegedly not put through confirmatory testing. I will tell you that as a general matter, I believe both UKIA's audit and the HIWU report seem to suggest that the record for confirmatory testing is reflected in the LIMS system, and it is not. So those confirmatory tests are reported they are not reported in connection with the sample numbers in the LIMS system. So there is an additional piece of information that we haven't seen referenced in either the HIWU report nor in the UKIA, where the actual results for confirmatory tests are kept.
Ms. Gay.
Yes. In short, the investigations revealed that these confirmatory tests were actually not occurring. On top of that, the documentation was not being kept. With science, if there's no documentation, it didn't happen. Science must be able to repeat itself. In this situation, Dr. Stanley was not using the proper documentation within the lab, and he was not performing confirmatory analysis, which is why we have no record of it. So not having it is part of the problem. And it would not be in LIMS. There were some issues with software implementation, as they pointed out in the responses, but HIWU actually created an alternative for reporting to prevent whatever was happening from happening in the future, and Dr. Stanley still refused to conform to the protocol.
I don't see any evidence of Dr. Stanley's refusal to conform to the protocol, but I will tell you, Dr. Stanley denies that confirmatory tests were not being performed. They were, in fact, the UK Gluck Center is where the confirmatory test for the EPO product is. It is not at the EACL, so while technically correct that the EACL lacked capacity for confirmatory testing, it is not true that UK lacked capacity, nor is it true that it did not perform confirmatory testing. Dr. Stanley has no access to any of the records that were in his lab. And certainly, if given access, he could perhaps point the university to where the records are kept for the confirmatory testing that was allegedly not performed. But Dr. Stanley denies that confirmatory tests were not being performed. He also denies false reporting of results, and he denies fraudulent voting. He's done so explicitly in his papers.
Since we're left to the documentation in the file, I'll just note that if Dr. Stanley was in fact performing confirmatory analysis, he would have detected the prohibited substance that was found in the blind sample that was sent by the RMTC, which again was sent to every accredited lab, and everyone found the prohibited substance except Dr. Stanley's lab, because he was not performing confirmatory analysis.
Floor is still open. Trustee Myers?
The university relies on an internal audit report and a highway report. Does Dr. Stanley concede that he has these reports and understands how the university is using these reports? And does he concede that the university is not relying on any other?
Dr. Stanley does concede that the university is relying on the UKIA and the highway reports in connection with this revocation proceeding. He does note that those two reports contain conclusions that are the culmination of investigative work. He has none of the underlying data or documents or interviews from which these conclusions are derived. In the absence of having the actual evidence, Dr. Stanley submits that his due process rights in connection with this proceeding have not been satisfied.
Ms. Stepgate, any response?
My only response is Dr. Stanley opted not to participate in either investigation. So the reports might look differently, and maybe he participated in supporting his position, but he is not.
Floor is open for discussion. Questions, Trustee Swanson?
As a scientist, I have concerns about evidence in the report that indicates that Dr. Stanley did not use standard operating procedures, which included lack of a positive and negative controls, which are essential for these types of scientific analysis. Could you comment?
Again, I just want to reiterate for the board that I'm not here to testify on behalf of Dr. Stanley, and I cannot speak or answer any specific questions regarding that particular issue. He does maintain that there were standard operating procedures, and standard operating procedures were followed in connection with the lab's testing of all of its samples.
Ms. Stepgate, any response? Ms. Keith, Dr. Stanley references collusion between HIWU and the university. Please elaborate on what motive either entity would have to harm Dr. Stanley or the Equine Analytical Chemical Laboratory by going through this process.
I would echo Ms. Stepgate's concern about speculating as to the motives of HISA and HIWU or the University of Kentucky. I will say that in connection with the materials that we've submitted, there is an email from Lisa Lazarus to Dean Nancy Cox that explicitly says before either investigation was undertaken that Dr. Stanley needs to not work in the horse racing industry again, and that needs to be accomplished by making the public aware of what he has done. This email exchange was in early March, and the HISA and the HIWU report was September 17th, and the University of Kentucky's internal audit was published officially and formally in October. So there is communications between HISA and the University of Kentucky outcome determinative for the removal of Dr. Stanley before either reports were concluded, and that's the basis for our assertion that there's collusion. Moreover, in connection with his report, it reflects frequently that Dr. Stanley was a vocal critic of the rollout of the new procedure in connection with his protocol, and as such, he was not a darling of his Ohio. So their desire to remove him is likely based on his vocal criticism of their program and its inadequacies.
Again,
I'll just state that Dr. Stanley was heavily recruited to the University of Kentucky to run this lab. We are a flagship university in Kentucky, which the horse industry is obviously very, very prominent in Kentucky. I disagree there would be any motive for the university to go through this, to go through all of this, the publicity of it and all of it. No university would want this type of stain.
do you have further comment, Ms. Keith?
I would say that the university doesn't have the stain. I would say that my client is the one who has the stain. The university has put all of the flaws and weaknesses of the EACL on Dr. Stanley. So I don't think the university is experiencing the stain, but Dr. Stanley's career is over as a result.
The floor is still open. Trustee Vance.
Why did Dr. Stanley choose not to cooperate with either the UK internal audit or the Highland investigations?
Again, I don't want to risk testifying on behalf of Dr. Stanley in connection with this proceeding, but Dr. Stanley did participate in the Office of Equity and Inclusion's investigation into his wrongdoing. He believed in connection with that, he was subject to unfair treatment, including inquiry related to unsubstantiated allegations of sexual harassment and discrimination. And based on his participation in the first inquiry and investigation, he did not feel as though he would have adequate opportunity to reflect back his side of the story.
The OEO investigation is completely irrelevant to Stanley's performance. It had nothing to do with whether or not he was performing his role as the director of the EACL. And then I'll just note that while he claims he was treated unfairly, he was found not responsible in that situation, so I'm not sure why that would be relevant either.
Well, I would suggest that because the OIEEO determined that there was insufficient evidence of sexual harassment or inappropriate misconduct on the part of Dr. Stanley, yet the UKIA continued to investigate that allegation in spite of its own internal conclusion that there was insufficient evidence. That's case in point that he was being treated unfairly. A determination that there was insufficient evidence should have ended the inquiry into Dr. Stanley's alleged inappropriate misconduct, yet it was included in the 30-page audit.
Again, OEO's investigation was relative to whether or not sexual harassment in the workplace was taking place. Dr. Stanley somewhat participated. The young lady who was involved did not participate, so there was not enough information to move forward. The other inquiry by the internal audit, that dealt more with the conflict of interest in that, as you all saw in the packet, Dr. Stanley's writing a cover letter for a potential applicant, and then he hires that applicant. So that has nothing to do with sexual harassment or allegations of sexual harassment. So internal audit was looking into the conflicts of interest. OEO was looking into was there sexual harassment. Two separate issues that should not be conflated.
The audit alleged an inappropriate relationship, including the use of university funds to pay for a hotel room for the staff's employee. So clearly it was addressing alleged inappropriate conduct.
Never explicitly says he paid for a room for the STEP's employee. There were 2 flights purchased and 1 room paid for.
Floor is still open. Trustee Case.
Ms. Keith, Dr. Stanley claims that there are documents which would prove his innocence. Can you describe those documents and how they would prove that Dr. Stanley actually performed the test?
I have to be very careful here. I cannot describe the documents. The There is a protective order in connection with the production by the University of Kentucky, and that protective order prohibits me from referencing the content of those documents outside of that proceeding. So unfortunately, I'm unable to answer your question. I have requested that the University of Kentucky, who is the holder of that privilege, waive the privilege in order to enable us to be able to utilize those documents.
A protective order is not a privilege, it's an order from the court. We don't have, as a university, the authority to overrule the court. Ms. Keith moved for that protective order, meaning that she moved, well, it was an agreed protective order among the parties, I'll put it that way, right? So Ms. Keith agreed to the protective order. She can also move to modify the protective order, but the board doesn't have the authority to do that. That has to happen in the circuit court. So again, just reminding the board, there's a circuit court action that's going on that is not relevant here, and this is the administrative action. Ms. Keith spends a lot of time in her brief talking about what she had to go through to get these documents. The bottom line is she got the documents in the circuit court action. She claims she has these documents, but they're protected by an order that she has yet to move to modify to defend her client.
It's an agreed order, meaning the parties agreed to the order. If this party, the University of Kentucky, would agree to a modification of the order, I wouldn't have to move the court. We could simply enter an amended, agreed order eliminating the restriction on my use of those documents in connection with this proceeding. I haven't asked for this to happen at the first level in front of this board. I asked the same of the president, not in connection with the supplemental brief I submitted subsequent to the faculty hearing. So this request has been made.
Let me make a statement, then I'd like to make another statement. As my new position as a lifetime honorary trustee, I keep vote or make a motion. But by counsel, he has advised me I can make a statement anytime I feel strong about something. I'd like to just take a minute in case there's some board members that doesn't understand. I don't want to address this, but I'd like to address how testing is done in the state of Kentucky. Because probably there's some members that don't realize. In every race, in every thoroughbred race in this state, after that race is run and a winner is declared, and the tote board shows the payoffs and all that, 3 horses normally in every race is tested. Normally, the winner is always tested, normally maybe the loser, and then if there's another horse that's picked by the stewards or the best at random, to be tested. So there's normally 3 tests in every race in this state. And sometimes it'll vary by the number of races, but normally those tests are somewhere around 10,000 tests a year. Now, in those 10,000 tests, it varies year from year. And years ago, normally we had 5 or 6 what we call class 1 violations. That's the worst violations. There are different classes of medication that you can give a horse, and different classes of forbidden medication you can't give a horse. Some of the serious things like cocaine, things like that are called class 1. So over the years, we used to have less than 10 in the state. So the testing and the test is given. I always thought, when I was chairman of the Racing Commission, we devised this test and brought it to the industry. We test 300 and some drugs in every test. It's called the super test. So in every test that's given at the track, there's 300 some drugs it's tested for. But anyway, I'd just like to say that the credibility of the industry and thoroughbred racing in this state and other states too relies on the testing reputation of the testing facility. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Trustee Shute. The floor is open for any further questions. Trustee Swanson.
So I was on the Horse Racing Commission Drug Research Council, and at that time we had somebody else who was running the tests. And my question is, How do the results that we obtained from Dr. Stanley compare to that previous laboratory's analysis that was performed?
I certainly am not qualified to answer that question. Is anybody in this room qualified to answer that question? The question is unanswerable. Any further questions?
Can I make one more statement?
Yes, sir.
At one time, the University of California, Davis was the testing facility. A lot of people in this state worked a lot of years to get this to the University of Kentucky. It's a really important test. Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing no questions, do I hear a motion? Vice Chair Case.
Chair Brockman, I move the board terminate Dr. Stanley's tenure and dismiss him from the university's employment.
Is there a second? It's been seconded by Trustee Vance. Is there any discussion on the floor regarding the motion to terminate Dr. Stanley's tenure and dismiss him from university employment?
Make an amendment to the motion that we first go into closed session.
There's an amendment to go into closed session. Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. Any discussion on the amendment to go into closed session? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the amendment to go into closed session, please signify by saying aye. Opposed? The noes carry. We're back on the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Opposed? Abstentions? One abstention. The motion passes. The meeting is adjourned.